There's a strange silence hidden inside the loudest nights of your life. You don't hear it while the music is playing, while the car doors are slamming, while somebody is yelling from the back seat and the whole town feels like it belongs to you. But years later, that silence is what comes back. The feeling that everybody was standing on the edge of something and pretending like it was just another night. In Dazed and Confused, Richard Linklater turns the last day of school into a ghost story about freedom. Not because anyone disappears, but because childhood does. Dazed and Confused is often remembered as a party movie, a soundtrack movie, a movie of muscle cars, hazing rituals, keg cups, bell bottoms, baseball tees, and teenagers with nowhere to be except for everywhere all at once. But Richard Linklater was reaching for something deeper than nostalgia. He was capturing that strange emotional weather of a life transition before anybody has the language to name it. The film takes place on the last day of school in 1976. But it's really about the last stretch of childhood before the future starts asking for signatures, choices, promises, and direction. There is no traditional plot, because that's not how those nights feel when you're young. They do not announce themselves as important. They just happen. You drive around. You look for the party. You say things you barely mean. You laugh too hard. You pretend tomorrow is impossible. And years later, you realize that whole night was a doorway. That is what makes Dazed and Confused such a perfect nostalgia movie. It understands freedom as a feeling, not a destination. Freedom is Pink refusing to sign away his identity to a football program. It is Mitch stepping into a night bigger than anything he has known. It's the kids wandering through Austin streets, pool halls, drive-ins, fields, and house parties, as if the whole town was built for them. Behind the camera, the movie had its own collision of youth and pressure. Linklater was coming off Slacker and entering the studio system for the first time. The young cast treated the production like a wild summer memory, all while Linklater fought to keep the movie loose, honest, and observational. The result is a film about one night that feels endless, and the moment childhood starts disappearing in the rear view. The opening of Dazed and Confused feels less like the beginning of a movie and more like a memory of pulling into a parking lot. Aerosmith's Sweet Emotion rolls in first, slow and confident, before the orange Pontiac GTO glides across the school grounds like it owns the afternoon. Around it, everything is already in motion. Cars idle, kids lean against hoods. The school year is over before anyone has fully processed what that means. The building is still there, but its power is gone. The bell has rung, summer has begun, and for a few brief hours, the rules feel suspended. That's the emotional genius of Richard Linklater's setup. He does not begin with a dramatic crisis. He begins with release. The last day of school is one of those rare moments when time seems to open up. Everybody knows something is ending, but nobody wants to ruin the feeling by saying it. The seniors act invincible because they're about to leave the world that made them feel important. The freshmen act nervous because they're about to enter a world that will test them. The juniors and sophomores hover somewhere in between, already measuring where they fit into the social order that will reset by morning. For Pink, that freedom comes with a catch. The coaches want him to sign a pledge promising not to use drugs or alcohol during football season. On paper, it's about discipline. But to Pink, it feels like the first adult hand reaching into his life and trying to claim him. He is not rejecting football as much as he's rejecting the idea that one version of himself has to become permanent before he is ready. That's why Dazed and Confused is not just about getting out of school. It's about the tiny window between being told what to do and choosing who to become. The characters spend the night driving, laughing, chasing parties, and avoiding home. But underneath all of it is a question they cannot quite articulate. When the bell rings for the last time, what part of you gets left behind? In Dazed and Confused, freedom does not look like escape. It looks like movement. Nobody is trying to leave town forever. Not yet. They're just trying to stay in motion long enough to keep the night alive. They cruise from the school parking lot to the Emporium, from the pool hall to the drive-thru, from one rumor of a party to the next. The cars are not just transportation. They're little rolling bedrooms, confession booths, stages, hiding places, and time machines. They let the characters feel older than they are, even when they're just circling the same streets they've known their entire lives. That's part of what makes the movie so emotionally true. Teenage freedom is rarely actual freedom. It is borrowed freedom. It's permission stretched to its limits. It's being out late enough to feel like the world has changed, even if your parents still live 5 minutes away. It's the illusion that because nobody knows exactly where you are, nobody can tell you who to be. Linklater understands the poetry of aimlessness. The characters are always looking for something: the party, a place to hang out, someone to impress, or someone to avoid. But the search is more important than the destination. The night keeps expanding because nobody wants it to settle into meaning. Meaning would make it real. Meaning would mean asking what happens after graduation, after summer, after the version of yourself that only exists when school is out and the windows are down. For Mitch, the incoming freshman, the freedom is brand new. He begins his day as a target, chased and paddled by older kids who treat cruelty like tradition. But by nightfall, he is inside the world that frightened him. He's riding in cars, drinking beer, talking to older girls, and discovering that high school is not one doorway, but a maze of them. Every choice feels dangerous. Every invitation feels like transformation. For the seniors, the same freedom feels more fragile. They've already lived this ritual before. And underneath the laughter is the sense that this may be the last time it feels exactly like this. The road is open, the music is loud, but morning is waiting. Richard Linklater did not make Dazed and Confused like someone trying to polish the past until it shined. He made it like someone trying to remember the texture of a time. The awkwardness, the boredom, the cruelty, the laughter, the music, the weird social codes, and the way a single night could feel both meaningless and unforgettable. That's why the film never feels like a greatest hits version of the 70s. Yes, the clothes are perfect, the cars are perfect, and the soundtrack is loaded with songs that feel carved into the decade. But Linklater's real subject is not nostalgia as decoration. It is memory as atmosphere. He is not asking, wasn't it great back then? He's asking something much more complicated. What did it feel like to be young, trapped, free, bored, hopeful, scared, and pretending like none of it mattered? Coming off Slacker, Linklater stepped into the studio system with a movie that resisted the usual studio shape. Universal wanted something easier to sell, something closer to a broad teen comedy. Linklater wanted a hangout film, built on observation, not punchlines. He wanted the rhythm of wondering, the accidental poetry of conversations that go nowhere, and the emotional truth of teenagers killing time because they don't yet understand that time is the thing they're spending. That tension gives Dazed and Confused its lasting power. The movie feels loose, but it's not careless. It feels casual, but it's carefully tuned. Every group of characters carries a different version of youth. Pink is resisting the future be written for him. Mitch is stepping into adolescence with bruises and wonder. Wooderson is the warning sign, the guy who never fully left the parking lot. The freshman girls are learning how social rituals get passed down. The burnouts are laughing at systems they still cannot escape. Linklater captures all of that without forcing the movie into a lesson. He trusts the night to reveal itself. And that is why Dazed and Confused feels less like a story being told and more like a memory being replayed. Hazy, funny, painful, and still somehow glowing at the edges. One of the reasons Dazed and Confused feels so alive is that the cast does not seem like they are performing youth from a safe distance. They seem like they're still inside it, and that's partly because many of them were. The film now looks like a yearbook full of future stars, but at the time, most of them were still unknown or barely known. Matthew McConaughey, Ben Affleck, Parker Posey, Milla Jovovich, Joey Lauren Adams, Adam Goldberg, Anthony Rapp, Cole Hauser, Rory Cochrane, Jason London. They were not yet the faces audiences would later recognize. They were young actors living through their own uncertain transition, making a movie about young people standing at the edge of theirs. That gives the film a strange double exposure. On screen, the characters are waiting to find out who they will become, and off screen, the actors were doing the same thing. McConaughey's story has become part of the film's mythology. Wooderson was not designed to become one of the defining characters of the movie. He was smaller on the page, almost a background figure, the older guy still hanging around, still chasing the old rhythm of high school. But McConaughey brought something magnetic to him. His chance meeting with casting director Dawn Phillips helped put him in the film, and his improvised all right became more than a line. It became an arrival. But Wooderson also gives the movie one of its quiet warnings. He's funny, charismatic, and unforgettable, but he is also what happens when the last day of school never really ends. He is freedom without forward motion. The guy still orbiting the same teenage world because it's the only place where he knows how to be legendary. Ben Affleck's O'Banion represents another shadow in the memory. He is insecurity turned into cruelty, a bully trying to hold on to power through rituals that should have ended with him. Parker Posey's Darla does something similar from another angle, turning tradition into performance, making hazing feel like theater. Together, the cast gives the movie its heartbeat: funny, messy, restless, young, and already becoming something they cannot yet see. What makes Dazed and Confused feel so enduring is the fact that it never lets nostalgia become too clean. The movie is warm, but it's not soft. It remembers the music, the cars, the jokes, the first tastes of freedom, and the thrill of being young in a world that temporarily feels unsupervised. But it also remembers something less comfortable: the cruelty, the fear, the pressure to belong, the strange rituals that teenagers inherit without ever stopping to ask why they exist. The hazing scenes are the clearest example. The incoming freshman boys are hunted down and paddled by older students who treat humiliation like a rite of passage. The freshman girls are rounded up, yelled at, covered in condiments, and made to perform their place in the social order. The movie plays some of this with comedy, but it never fully disguises the discomfort underneath. Everyone involved understands the rules because the rules existed before them. That's what makes it unsettling. Nobody invented cruelty that day. They're just passing it along. That is one of Linklater's sharpest observations. Childhood is not innocent just because adults are absent. Sometimes the absence of adults gives teenagers room to recreate the same systems of power in miniature. The seniors become authority figures. The freshmen become initiates. The parking lot becomes a kingdom. And for one day, the kids who were once afraid get to become the people others are afraid of. This is where Dazed and Confused becomes more complicated than a simple love letter to youth. It understands that memory edits things. Years later, we may remember the songs, the summer air, the feeling of riding in a car with the windows down. But the movie keeps the bruises in the frame. It remembers the kid running through the neighborhood terrified of being caught. It remembers the embarrassment of wanting to belong badly enough to endure almost anything. That tension is why the movie still works. It's nostalgic because it feels true, not because it pretends the past was better. Linklater gives us the glow of youth, but he leaves the shadows in. Behind the camera, Dazed and Confused had its own coming-of-age story. For much of the young cast, the production felt like the kind of summer the movie was trying to capture. They were mostly unknown actors thrown together in Austin, playing teenagers who were roaming through one long night of freedom. The atmosphere off-screen began to blur with the atmosphere on-screen. Friendships formed quickly. Energy spilled everywhere. The cast was young enough, hungry enough, and certain enough that the whole experience carried the same restless charge as the film itself. But for Linklater, the experience was not just a carefree memory. It was also his first real collision with Hollywood. After Slacker, Linklater had become one of the defining voices of American independent film. Dazed and Confused gave him a larger canvas, a period setting, a studio, a bigger cast, music, cars, costumes, and expectations. But those expectations came with pressure. The studio wanted a movie it could easily market, something broader, something more like a conventional teen comedy. Linklater was trying to make something stranger and more honest, a film without a traditional plot, built around drifting, observation, boredom, rituals, and mood. That fight matters because the finished movie feels so effortless. It feels like someone simply opened a window into 1976 and let the night wander in. But that looseness had to be protected. Linklater had to defend the pauses, the hangouts, the small conversations, the refusal to turn every character into a punchline or every scene into a plot point. Even the cast's looseness became a part of the movie's identity. The performances feel lived in, because the actors were given the space to bring themselves into the roles. McConaughey's Wooderson expanded because the camera recognized something electric happening. Lines, rhythms, gestures, and attitudes began to feel discovered rather than manufactured. That's the paradox of Dazed and Confused. It's a movie about freedom made under pressure. A movie about kids refusing to be boxed in, directed by a filmmaker, trying not to let his movie get boxed in either. When Dazed and Confused first arrived, it did not land like a blockbuster. It was not the kind of movie that demanded attention with a giant plot, a massive opening weekend, or a clean marketing hook. In some ways, that makes perfect sense. The film itself is casual by design. It does not grab you by the collar. It leans against the car next to you and lets the night happen. But over time, that looseness became its power. The movie grew the way memories grow, through rewatches, through quotes, through dorm rooms, late night cable, DVDs, friendships, and people discovering at exactly the right age. A film that once seemed small started to feel enormous because it captured something people recognized but rarely saw dramatized so honestly: the emotional sprawl of youth before life becomes organized. Part of its cult status came from the cast becoming famous later. Watching Dazed and Confused now feels like opening a time capsule full of people before the world knew what they would become. Matthew McConaughey before movie star mythology. Affleck before Oscar speeches and directing acclaim. Parker Posey before becoming an indie film icon. The entire cast seems suspended in the same kind of pre-future moment the characters are living through. But the deeper reason the movie lasts is that it refuses to age in the usual way. Yes, it's filled with 70s details. The clothes, the cars, the music, the slang, the rituals. But the feeling underneath belongs to every generation. Every generation has its version of the last school day. Every generation has its version of driving around with nowhere to go. Every generation has a night that felt ordinary until it became unreachable. That's why Dazed and Confused is more than just nostalgia. Nostalgia often turns the past into a postcard. This movie turns it into weather. You do not just look at it. You feel the heat, the boredom, the pressure, the possibility. And when the morning comes, you realize the party was never really the point. The point was being young enough to believe that that night might never end. In the end, Dazed and Confused is not remembered because it tells us what happened on the last day of school in 1976. It is remembered because it understands what the last day of school feels like after years have passed. It understands the strange magic of a night that seems meaningless while you're living it. The wondering, the waiting, the cars moving from one place to another. The music filling in the spaces where nobody knows what to say. The friendships that feel permanent because nobody has tested them against distance yet. The freedom that feels limitless because adulthood has not fully arrived to measure it. Richard Linklater captured all of that without turning it into a lesson. He did not make a movie about a teenager learning how to grow up. He made a movie about an entire town of kids delaying the realization that growing up has already started. Pink, Mitch, Wooderson, Darla, O'Banion, Slater, Simone, Jody. All of them are moving through the same night, but each of them is standing at a different edge. That's why the film still glows. It's funny, messy, uncomfortable, warm, and sad in ways it never has to announce. It remembers that youth is not only innocence, it is performance, pressure, fear, cruelty, desire, and the desperate need to belong. But it's also open windows, loud songs, borrowed time, and the feeling that the road ahead belongs entirely to you. Dazed and Confused became a cult classic because it never stops feeling like somebody's memory. Maybe not your exact school, not your exact town, not your exact last day, but the feeling is there. The moment before the future hardens, the night before everything changes. That final stretch of childhood where nobody wants to go home, because going home means the night is over.